Hi guys, Rachel here from ElleLabelle Crochet, and so today I'm going to be letting you know about tension in crochet and why it's important, and some good tips on how to improve your tension. If you want to know, keep watching and I will see you shortly. So you might be wondering what tension in crochet is. So tension relates to how tight or how loose your stitch is, and how that impacts how your project actually turns out. So it can be a very elusive beast. Some people find it really easy to maintain tension in their work, others don't necessarily, or find that it's a long process to improve their tension. I'm going to go through about 8 tips on how you can improve your tension, and I'm going to show you some cool little bits and pieces on how you can best do it, including a little tension regulator that I've stumbled across on the Crochet Bug page. We'll put a link to that down below in the video, in the description box, sorry. And let's get started. So your first tip, and it's probably the most common thing that everybody will say, it may not be the most constructive thing that you've been told, but practice does make perfect. It's like with any new skill, the more you do something, the better you are going to get at it. It may take you a couple of weeks, it may take you a couple of months. You will get there. You will eventually get to a point where your tension does improve. The next tip I am going to talk to you about is about using a center pull cake or skein of yarn. So, and I'll show you using this one if I can find the center pull. So this skein of yarn, and I've pulled it out and rewound it, so excuse that. So a center pull, instead of using this strand that comes from the outside, as you can see here, this one's on the outside, you need to go into here, and I will see if I can get it without getting a big load of yarn bath. So there we go, first go. So instead of pulling it from the outside, you are pulling it from the inside of your skein. You can also use a cake and pull your yarn from the inside of a cake. I've found that really useful. That's a tip that I stumbled across probably about 4 or 5 months into my crochet journey, and I found that incredibly helpful. The other thing is that with these big skeins of yarn, you can also, I'll move out the way, use a yarn winder, and that can help you turn your yarn into a cake somewhat like this. So this here was originally a skein of yarn like that. I've used my ball winder to turn it into a cake, and as you can see, I can pull from the center. So useful little tool to have. I will be doing a review on this particular yarn winder in another video. However, that one was more upper end one that I purchased. You don't have to spend the money that I spent on that one. You can buy a cheaper one off of eBay, Amazon, and they're around about the $25 to $40 mark. But a really, really good investment in your crochet journey. So tip number 3 is to utilize some other yarn accessories. This is particularly handy if you prefer to pull your yarn from the outside of your skein. I now prefer to pull from the center, but I know that a lot of people prefer to pull from the outside so they can sort of keep track of where they're at. I don't have either of them with me at the moment, but you can either use a yarn bowl or a yarn butler. I'll insert some photos here so that you can see what they look like. You can get lots of different styles, particularly of the yarn bowls, and they don't have to cost a lot. My favourite ones that I like come from my favourite little yarn shop, Yarninspired. But the yarn bowl itself is about $58. So a little bit costly if you don't want to spend that money straight off the bat, but you can buy them a bit cheaper, again on Amazon, eBay, Etsy. And the yarn butler is a beautiful little contraption. You can whack your ball of yarn on the spindle and it just spins for you instead of your ball flopping around all over the floor or the table or wherever you might be putting it. So that's another option and I highly recommend it. So I'll pop in some photos here and then we'll keep going. So tip number 4 is to work out the most simplest of things, whether you're a tight crocheter or a loose crocheter. Now, this can be impacted just by how you hold your ball, but also by your mood. Everybody crochets differently, everybody holds their hook differently, everybody holds their yarn differently. So it's not that you're doing it wrong. You need to find what's comfortable for you, but that inevitably may make you a tighter or looser crocheter. So a great way to work that out is to do yourself a gauge swatch and work out whether your stitches are tighter or looser than what it says on the yarn packaging. So I'll pull out my Skinny Cakes wrapper again. So if you look closely, where are we? Come on, focus. My camera doesn't want to focus. Sorry guys. Nope. Okay, so it's not going to focus for me, so I apologise for that. But so for the Karen Skinny Cakes that I'm using for my current pattern test, it's a 3-weight or an 8-ply yarn. To make a 10 by 10 centimetre square with 16 stitches across the bottom and 17 rows, you should be using a 4mm hook. So the best way to do that is take the 4mm hook, take the yarn that you're using, so for this one particularly, make yourself 16 single crochets in your foundation row and then make 17 rows up, and I'll show you how to do that in the video I'm doing on how to do a single crochet. Then you take your tape measure, measure your width and your height, and if that's 10 by 10 centimetres, then you're sitting on about par. If you're finding that it's bigger than your 10 by 10 centimetres, then you're probably a loose crocheter. If you're finding that it's smaller, then you're a tight crocheter. So really easy way of doing that. And the way you then can make your gauge swatch to the correct sizing is you either go up or down a crochet hook. I sort of sit about the middle. I started off pretty loose, but I've gradually tightened it up as I've practiced. So there you go, tip number 1, practice makes perfect. So tip number 5 is to use a tension regulator. The best one I've come across is from Crochet Bug. I'll put a link to their page in the description box down below. But it's a little contraption you crochet up, pop over your finger, feed your yarn through, and it helps just to keep the tension on the yarn consistent while you're working with it. Great little contraption to use when you're first starting out. I will also do a demonstration of that at the end of this video. Tip number 6 is to make sure you're using the right yarn. Seems like a really simple tip, but it can make a big difference. So when I started out using an 8-ply. I then moved over to the 10-ply, which is this one. And I, again, apologise for the state of this yarn because it's just a mess. But I would also recommend staying away from your novelty yarns, so your fluffy ones and your ones with bobbles and loops and those sorts of things. They can be really hard to work with when you're starting out. A plain, simple yarn is your best bet. Make sure you've got the right hook to go with it though. Tip number 7 comes down to what you're comfortable with, and it's about working out how you're comfortable holding your yarn and holding your crochet hook. So there's 2 different ways you can hold your crochet hook. I will put a picture in here to show you. There's either the pencil hold or the knife hold, as you've just seen in this picture. I'm a pencil hold kind of person. I've tried doing the knife hold and I just can't keep my speed up or my tension up for that matter. And there's also a gazillion different ways that you can hold your yarn for maintaining tension. There's about 3 different ways that I hold mine, depending on the thickness of the yarn and what I'm actually doing with it. I will show you a couple of those when I show you how to make the tension regulator at the end of the video. My 8th tip, and it's kind of counterintuitive to what I said in my tools video, which I will link down below, of using a more improved hook. So in that video I recommended just using a basic hook to start out with, and it's great, but I have found that my tension has improved immensely with using a better hook. So I went from using a basic metal hook to using the Tulip brand hooks. They're really, really good. I've also just discovered the Clover hooks in the last week and I'm absolutely in love with those as well. So they're my 8 tips on how to improve your tension. I will add in the tension regulator and a couple of other little tips and tricks at the end of the video. But the most important things to remember is that you're not the same as somebody else. You're going to do things differently. You're going to hold your hook differently to the next person. You're going to hold your yarn differently to the next person. There's no right or wrong. It's what's comfortable for you. Don't forget to utilize the tools that are available, like your yarn butlers, your yarn bowls, your centre pull skeins. Brilliant. Keep your yarn simple to start out with. Use an 8 or a 10-ply, right size hook. Don't be disheartened if your tension isn't correct straight away. It does take practice. And back to my first tip, and I will harp on about it, but tip number 1, practice makes perfect, is the best thing ever. So I will leave you with that. I will insert the tutorial component of this video in just a moment. Okay, so holding your tension, and as you can see I've got some yarn here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a quick slip knot. And I am just going to chain a couple just so that I can show you. So obviously you've got your work here, and I'm holding it with those 2 fingers between there. Now my main way that I hold is yarn over that finger and down into my hand like that. Obviously if I'm holding like that you can't see what I'm doing, so I will yarn over and hold that yarn between those 2 fingers, and then I will hold my yarn underneath these 2. This one's more just as a guide, but your pinky fingers the one that holds your yarn. So, and it's a little bit hard to see. So obviously if I pull on that, you can see that the yarn goes quite taut in my hand. And then I can consistently and I just use my index finger to pull the yarn through my fingers. The other way I do it, and I'll put it down, put my hook down for a second. So the other way I do it is I'll still have my yarn over that finger, but then I will take the end of the yarn and feed it over like that. Again, I'm using my pinky to hold it, but this just gives me a little bit more tighter tension. The final way that I do it is still like this, but then I will wrap it around my finger like that. Now I normally do that style for a 4-ply or smaller, just because it gives me a little bit of extra hold. I also will use just the over like that for a lightweight 8-ply. Again, just gives me that little bit of extra. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Go and have a look at my blog because there's a little post on tension over there. Check out my socials. If you've got any comments, drop them in below. And if you want to, send me an email, say hi, do whatever you want to. I'll see you in the next video.